I fought the werewolf until I became a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I got approached and attacked by a werewolf who wanted to steal my cabin. Of course, I hadn't built that cabin. I had just discovered it abandoned and moved in because I was homeless. This werewolf, he was in a similar situation to what I had been in when I found the place, and so when he first approached, I tried to be hospitable and friendly. To be clear, I did not know he was a werewolf when I met him. I just took him to be a homeless man. He was that too, certainly. Let's call this guy Jack just to give him a name. I don't remember if I ever learned his real name. Jack was a big man, but not too much bigger than I was at the time. I was and am 6'1", but in those days I worked out daily. There was an exercise machine in the shack next to the cabin, and I would use that old thing. It was starting to get rusty when I showed up, but it was still functional, and I built myself up when I was out there. It was for the same reason prisoners will get into bodybuilding. I just had a lot of free time to fill. I guess I should explain quickly that I am a survivalist, and it was during this period when I first started moving my life seriously in that direction. But I had become homeless first. Then I took to the woods, and in the woods I started to live like a survivalist. I don't remember if I even knew the word back then though. I just taught myself to hunt, to skin meat, to find edible berries and tubers, and to fend for myself off the grid. I had been a professional boxer, but I quit as I was about to become a heavyweight. I studied martial arts for a while too, but survivalism is something I fell into first and learned later. I didn't actually do any research into that kind of lifestyle until later on, when I sort of went back on the grid for a while. So when I was a young man, I had a falling out with my various employers and my girlfriend, and I just split to become an old school hobo. I went looking for a rail line to stow away on, but that proved to be a dead end. I walked into the woods one day and I found a new life for myself. I remember sleeping up in trees. I remember sleeping in tiny cave entrances I'd come across, and then one day, I found the cabin. It was just a little one-room cabin made of wood, with a stone fireplace and chimney that was thrown together with local rocks and cement. It was all clearly made by one man or two. There was no plumbing or electricity, but it did have a door, and it had wooden coverings you could open or close over a hole in the wall that served as a window. The main feature was that fireplace that you could warm yourself up with when it got too cold. When I first arrived, I found some newspapers in there and other junk. The most recent newspaper was dated 7 years prior to my arrival, and the whole place was infested with spiders and insects. Since it seemed clear that no humans had been there in a long time, I took the little cabin over and I used the broom I found inside to clean the place out. Living out there in the woods with that cabin as my base of operations, I fell into a Tarzan kind of an existence, at least in my head. I felt like I was Dr. Dolittle. Like I could talk to the animals. I felt like I had mental communication with predators when I saw them, especially bears. That's how far I had strayed off the grid. Looking back on it, I don't know if it was real or not, but I had become such a citizen of the wilderness that it made sense to me that predators had some means of communicating with each other, besides all-out turf wars. I mean, if we didn't, there would be all-out turf wars every day. In my case, when I was hunting and I saw a bear, I would look at the bear and I would know if he was going to back down or if I was going to have to be the one to retreat. It felt to me like our consciousnesses were somehow negotiating a settlement, and that soon enough our conscious minds would understand what the decision had been. Maybe it was just the bear sizing me up and deciding for himself what was going to happen, I don't know. But anyway, I was in my Mr. Natural state when this all went down. The werewolf stuff I'm about to get into with you here. So this was not the first homeless man I had come across out there. I would kind of play each one by instinct. Usually I'd bribe them to leave. Well, it was a 3-stage process. First I'd try to show that I had very little to share. Second, I'd demonstrate my formidable strength in some way, like taking my shirt off and chopping a log with the axe I found in the cabin. Then third, I'd offer something, usually some kind of food like deer meat jerky. Depending on the individual, I might give them some tips on food sources I knew of nearby or something like that, and try to get them to go away willingly. Well, I didn't actually have to try to get them to go, everyone always did. Everyone, that is, but this werewolf guy, Jack. The werewolf guy was different. I think I mentioned that he was big, but I didn't mean he was giant. He was a tall man, but so was I. He was pretty muscular, and I've established that I was as well. I could not tell if he was armed at first, but I had my axe. I chopped some wood with my shirt off, and he walked closer to me, chuckling. Then he started making comments to mock me. He pretended to be flirting with me, to imply that I would be into that sort of thing. Now, that's not a friendly way to say hello to a stranger. I slammed my axe down hard and I turned to face this idiot. If he wanted a fight, I knew how to do that. All of a sudden, he seemed more interested in talking. Bragging, really. Talking about how he was too much for me and how I didn't want to fight him. Nobody wants to fight anybody, I countered. To him, that was funny. Au contraire, mon frère, he said in an American accent, and then he told me that he wanted to fight me. Very, very much. But he'd be willing to avoid the fight if I got my stuff and got out of his cabin quickly enough. I froze for a second. Was this his cabin? No, he was bluffing to catch my reaction. Ha! He shouted. I knew you didn't build this cabin. You didn't look old enough. This thing must be 20 years old. He had just been playing head games with me to get me to reveal my situation to him. When he called it his cabin, for a split second I thought he might be speaking the truth. He caught that moment, and it told him that I didn't know whose cabin this really was. Psychologically, this made him feel on equal footing to me. Neither of us had built that cabin, but the one who had was long gone. That meant it should now belong to me since I had found it. But this other guy? No, he said he found it too. It became apparent that we were going to fight, so I pulled the axe out of the tree stump I had left it in, and I stood facing Jack, ready for battle. He said no fair, since he had no weapons. I asked him how I knew he had no weapons, and I swear Jack dropped trow and tore his shirt off, grinning and giggling like a complete lunatic. I promise not to use anything on you except what's naturally part of me, he taunted, wiggling around obscenely to make sure I saw everything. But even though I saw too much, I hadn't seen everything. I hadn't seen him transform into the werewolf yet. Have you ever seen a naked guy transform into a werewolf? I hadn't seen that before either. In those days, I had no context to explain what it looked like when I told others about this story. Now, I would say it looked like AI. I mean, like a bad AI animation. It was this guy standing there all ugly and naked, and the next thing you knew, you were watching his face sort of melt into itself and grow out of itself into a new and even uglier face than before. Does that make sense? I watched him sort of implode and explode both at the same time. And I watched him become a different person altogether. I really mean to say I watched him become something other than a person. I saw him transform slowly into a monster, but I didn't really understand that for most of this event. I watched him change, but I didn't know it was heading towards some coherent end goal. I mean, in the movies, once a werewolf transformation scene begins, you know what you're looking at. It makes sense in a dream logic kind of way. The man grows hair on his hand, on his face. He grows fangs, he has a dog nose instead of a human one. You know how it goes, we've all seen old Wolfman movies. Well, this was not like that. This was like AI. It looked illogical and it looked incoherent. It headed in all sorts of directions. It did not proceed logically. Sometimes his body looked like it was made out of moving solid smoke. It would billow into larger and then smaller forms. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. And so I kind of stood there immobilized, wondering what I was looking at. On some level, I probably knew I should have taken the axe to this guy while he was transforming. But I wonder if that would have done him any harm. His body appeared to be in complete flux. Maybe the axe would have passed through him, and his cells would have just reformed after it passed. It looked to me like no atom of his body was stationary. They all appeared to be in motion, swirling around and trying to decide on their next solid shape. At any rate, I did not attack while I had my chance. I stood there with my jaw open to the ground, watching that man become 18 different things, before suddenly gelling back into place as a big, scary-looking werewolf man. Now, I'm gonna have to get specific about some of my adjectives. When I say big, I don't really mean too much taller than he had been as a human. He did seem to have packed on some muscle, maybe. And he had tall dog ears up on top of his dog's skull. But he wasn't much taller than before, if he even was taller. So let's say he was between 6'2" and 6'4". I'm 6'1", so to me that's tall. At least a little bit taller than me. I hear stories on your channel and others about guys turning into 10-foot tall monsters. That was not what happened to me. I saw a guy a little taller than me turn into a werewolf a little taller than himself. Trust me, if you're seeing this happen IRL, you don't need him to be 10 feet tall to have the peas scared out of you. When that guy started reforming as the wolf man or dog man or whatever you want to call that version of him, I backed up into my little cabin and I shut the door after me. Then I sat in a chair and I started to pray. For the first time in years. God must have gotten as rusty at answering my prayers as I had gotten at making them, because the next thing I knew, the big naked wolfman had kicked my door open, grabbed me by the collar, and dragged me kicking and screaming out of the cabin to have it out with him once and for all. We were gonna fight, and the winner was gonna get to keep my cabin. The loser? Well, I didn't want to think about what might happen to the loser. I grew up in a bad neighborhood, and I fought guys much bigger than old Jack the Wolfman. Of course, those guys fought with their fists. They did not fight with tooth and claw. Jack fought with tooth and claw. Jack took my punches like they were love taps, and then he would swipe at me with his claws. Then he'd stand there waiting for me to whack him with my fists some more. He seemed to almost enjoy my attempts to damage him, but I didn't enjoy his efforts to rip me up. I'd say he was far more successful in his attempts to hurt me than I was in my pathetic punches and kicks. He was winning the fight, but I had reason to fight back. I expected him to finish me off if I lost this fight. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain if I kept fighting on. The longer the fight lasted, the longer I was still alive. And where there's life, there's hope. Maybe something lucky would happen, I reasoned. Maybe someone would rescue me. Maybe the creature man would die of a freak sudden illness. Maybe the Green Lantern Corps would show up and give me a power ring. I was grasping at straws, but I didn't want to die. And I didn't want to lose that cabin and shack either. So I fought on in the losing battle. And after a while, I started to feel surprised. Not that I was winning. I was never winning the fight. But I was surprised it was still going on. I figured that Jack the Wolfman was just toying with me. Maybe he was stretching it out to ease his own boredom. I didn't care. A few more seconds to live was a few more seconds to live. I tried every desperation move that you can try in a fight. I threw rocks at him. I grabbed dirt off the ground and threw it in his eyes. I fought dirty and I fought hard. And then, something started to happen that surprised me more than any other part of any of this. I stopped feeling weaker, and I started to feel stronger. His attacks hurt a little bit less each time, and my strength seemed to be coming back to me. I also felt a second wind in the sense that I knew my endurance was increasing, not decreasing. Somehow this fighting was making me stronger and I didn't understand why or how that was happening. All I knew at the time was that I felt a surge of extra energy, and I went ape on that wolfman we've named Jack. I went berserker on him. I started landing punches that I could see were unpleasant for him to experience. He seemed increasingly surprised that my attack was growing stronger, and at some point, he retreated into the woods. I hadn't expected to survive, let alone win, so I remember laughing hysterically in relief. The laughter didn't sound like me, though. In fact, it didn't really even sound like laughter. I figured I had a sore throat from the fight, but when I turned around, I caught my reflection in the cabin window. I was not myself any longer. I was a creature, like that guy. I was a wolfman like Jack. And ever since that night, I've been a werewolf. I used to be able to turn on a whim anytime I wanted. In fact, I don't think I really thought of it as changing. If I needed more strength, I would give myself some more strength. I did not have blackouts when I became the werewolf, and I still don't to this day. Of course, these days I only change on the full moon, and some months I barely even do that. But for years, I had the power when I needed it. Living alone in the woods, I would often forget that I was even changed when I was a wolf. I remember coming upon a young woman who seemed lost in the woods one day. I came around to ask her if she needed directions, but my words came out as a sort of a growl, because I had forgotten I was in the other form. She screamed and she ran away. Hopefully she ran in the right direction because I was running in the opposite direction. Her screaming freaked me out. When I first moved back to the suburbs, the werewolfism thing was a complication, but by then I was starting to age, and with age came a lessening of the lycanthropic urges and surges. I've lived with it for so long that I sometimes forget the random nature of how I got to be this way in the first place. If Jack had been smarter, he might have just kept walking that day. Or if he was going to take me on, he should have made it a short and decisive battle. Think about it. Jack the Wolfman should have finished me off quickly if he really wanted my cabin. By extending the fight, he allowed the wounds he was inflicting on me time to heal. He allowed the infection of his werewolfism to take hold inside my body. That's why I think he must have only recently become a werewolf. How else would he not know that he was strengthening me as he tried to kill me? It was a lesson that was not lost on my mind, believe me. That's all I'm going to say on that subject, but I have been careful never to make the same mistakes Jack made with me. Not now. Not since I have the power within me to transform. Not since the day when I fought the werewolf until I became a werewolf. The positive fractional part of the representation of a logarithm is a mantissa, and our executive producer for today is a Melissa. Melissa Kutch, that is. Melissa is a member of our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, and so she gets to see our secret members-only episodes, which we do 4 of each month. Here to explain how you too can get to see these and other perks is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.